This week, an art market, 4 canvases on the go, a jelly plate that took up an entire afternoon, and a series that's starting to tell me what it wants to be. Stick around. Hi, I'm Tamara Grand. I'm a self-taught abstract painter working out of my home studio in Port Moody, British Columbia. This is Studio Diary, a bi-weekly series where I take you into the studio and show you what I'm working on. Whether you're an art collector who wants to see what goes into an original painting, or a fellow artist who just likes watching somebody figure things out in real time, you're in the right place. Welcome. Last week I participated in the first annual Art in the Open art market in North Vancouver. We were really lucky. The weather held out. It didn't rain. There were 20 artisans, including a couple of my friends, Connie O'Connor and Marika Morissette, painters and ceramicists and jewelers and textile artists, and me. I was really happy with how my booth came together this time. I feel like I'm getting better at curating and better at setting things up and creating a really pleasing visual feast for the people who come by to visit. Don't you think? So here are my thoughts about yesterday's market. The foot traffic was awesome. There were lots and lots of people, but not so many that you couldn't talk to anybody who wanted to talk, and not so few that you got stuck sitting behind your booth twiddling your thumbs or scrolling Instagram for very long. It was that sweet spot of just enough activity that made the 5 hours go super quickly. And I will say a lot of the people that stopped to visit were fellow artists, which is great because the conversations you have with artists about your work tend to be on a different level than with people who just love art. So I got to talk about technique, I got to talk about the challenges in my process, and then learn about other people's techniques and challenges in their processes as well. Lots of people who stopped by were just captivated by color and shape, and that's what drew them into my booth. So I spent quite a bit of time asking people what they saw in the art, what the art made them feel. These are all the kinds of things that I want to go home with that sort of fill my bucket and make me feel excited about showing at an art market. And my neighbors were great. The other artists that were around me at the market were fantastic. We had some really wonderful conversations. We spelled each other off for bathroom breaks. One of them offered me wine, the other offered me sparkling water. And this isn't always the case. Sometimes you go to these events and the people that are sitting closest to you don't really have anything to say to you or don't really want to interact with you. So I will say on the people front, this market was a huge success for me. My very favorite moment of the day was when a mom and an 8-year-old girl came up to talk to me about my work. She was completely captivated by the color, and her mother told me that she was an artist, that since she was 4, she had been drawing and painting, and always in really bright, expressive colors. And she even took her phone out and scrolled through her phone and showed me a couple of images of her daughter's artwork. We spoke for a little while, and they left and promised that they would come back and see me at the North Shore Art Crawl in October. I really wished in the moment that I had thought to gift her a piece of art. I think I'm going to do this going forward. I think I'm going to choose someone at every event that I go to who engages with the work, who really feels something in the work, and offer them a piece on the house. Sort of pay it forward because so many artists supported me when I first got started. I'd love to do that for somebody else. It's always important to think about what I might do differently next time, so not everything was a massive success. I think I would still bring fewer pieces. I scaled down from my last market, but I felt that there might have still been a little bit too many pieces on display, and I noticed a couple of people who looked at a variety of things and walked away without buying. Maybe there was some decision fatigue there. They couldn't choose between them, so they walked away without purchasing anything. I also added a few items to my list that I better bring next time. A needle and thread can be used in all sorts of different kinds of emergencies. It would have been great to have some butterfly clips to be able to get my tablecloth down when the wind gusts came up. And I didn't bring enough to eat or drink. Rookie mistake. So all in all, I think it was a really successful day. And I want to remind anybody who is an artist or who's asking an artist about their success at a market like this, not to focus on how much the artist made, how many pieces of art the artist sold, because great, we love to sell our work. We go to these types of events, we price our work, we hope some of it's going to go home. But for me, the fact that I sold a handful of pieces of art is not what made this day successful for me. For me, it was all about the interactions with artists, the interactions with people who were attracted to my work, and maybe they weren't ready to buy it yesterday, but hopped on my email list, followed me on social media, wanted to talk to me about where the work was going, and promised that they'd see me at my next event. So here's a little update on the big canvases that I've been working on this new series. The two 60 by 48 inch ones are pretty much done. I'd say the first one is all finished. The second one is getting pretty close. And the third one, which I'm painting in landscape orientation, is really interesting. I'm quite happy with where this one's going. It's not anywhere near done, but I really like the shapes and the flow from the bottom left to the top right of the canvas. So doing new things is good. That's the lesson I'm telling myself. And because 3 paintings isn't enough, I've got to keep things busy. I threw a 30 by 40 inch canvas up on the wall to kind of collect my extra paint palette at the end of a session. So it's starting to feel a little crowded in my studio, not just because of all the big paintings, but because 2 four-legged creatures have recently introduced themselves to the space. Max and Ruby are in here checking everything out, getting into trouble, and hopefully not getting covered in paint. So now that I have 4 pieces in process, I'm starting to get a much better sense of what this work really means and what a collection built on this palette and these shapes might look like. I don't always know what my work means when I start out, or even sometimes when I'm in the middle of it, and lots of times it's not until a whole series of paintings is finished that I have a real understanding of what was going on inside my brain and inside my heart and what I was trying to communicate with the work. But I can see some things starting to come to the surface already with these pieces. Clearly movement is important. I mean, especially in this one here, you can kind of see the flow of these lines and these shapes and how they're moving from one corner of the canvas to another. I see something similar in this piece. There's great movement between these little clusters of shapes, and it's circling down to the next little cluster and coming back to this little cluster down here as well. So movement is really important. And then some of these drips and lines that stayed in as the work was being made, those are about connection. Clearly those are about connecting those different parts of the painting one to the other. I was thinking about this in particular with this piece because of working in that landscape orientation, and even when I started out drawing lines before I added any paint, I was really focusing on trying to connect all 4 corners of the canvas to one another so that they didn't feel like separate paintings. What I would really like to do is show this work together, ideally in a big space with big white gallery walls where the pieces can be set apart from one another. And I've started looking at some possibilities for shows to apply for 2027. So as I move forward with these works, I'm going to be also thinking about what other types of sizes and maybe mediums that I might use to sort of strengthen and broaden the application. So not all the work will be big, and I think for the next little while I may focus on working on paper, which is something I often do as a way of getting new ideas and exploring ideas that I was looking at on canvas in sort of a more immediate tactile way. And the best thing about the works on paper is that they're smaller, they're easier to cart to an exhibition space. These ones are going to require a U-Haul rental, again, remember. And they're a more accessible price point for people who might want to buy a piece of a collection that's on show at an exhibition. So I know this is kind of putting the cart before the horse. This is down the road, but I do think about all of these things at this point in the creation of a new body of work. With that being said, I'm going to show you some work that I did this week, going small, pulling out my Gelli plate and making some papers to do some of these works on papers, these collage works that I'm thinking might be a really nice addition to this series. So I'm using pieces of mixed media paper that are about 8.5 by 11, the same size as my Gelli plate, and the same color palette that I used on the big paintings. And really I'm just having a good play, but finding some interesting textures and some new color combinations that I didn't get on the canvases themselves. I decided to pull out some stencils because I think it's a really interesting way to get more variety and some pattern, which is very fun when you're working with paper. And those patterns, to me, remind me of aerial views of landscapes or maps, which is what the paintings themselves are starting to sort of evoke. Here's a selection of the papers that I ended up making. There's lots of variety here. I see lots of really interesting shapes and patterns and lots of potential for cutting and tearing and repurposing and pasting new compositions on watercolor paper, which is what I usually do. I also thought it might be kind of fun to use a piece of palette paper that I had used my leftover paint on, so that there's actually some brush strokes from the paintings in there as well. So stay tuned and I'll show you what these are starting to look like next week. Here's a couple examples of previous works on paper that I've made using the same types of papers, painted and Gelli printed. Fun, right? So in the last episode, we talked about these oil stick experiments that I was doing with R&F oil sticks and pigment sticks, and the work was really, really wet, and I promised that I would come back and do a finger touch dry test in a couple of weeks. So I did that on Instagram last week, and I'm just going to share that little test with you here. Oil stick update number 1. Alizarin orange. Not dry yet. Provence blue. Still pretty wet. Midnight blue. Definitely not dry. Zinc white titanium. A little drier, but not quite done yet. Olive yellow. Look, Ma, no yellow. Come back in another 2 weeks and we'll test the other ones again. So I know there's nothing more boring than watching paint dry. So while I do that, you can go ahead and watch what the kittens have been up to this week. I will see you back here in 2 weeks for another episode of Studio Diaries. If you have a chance, please like this video, leave me a comment. I'd love to know what you think, and subscribe to the channel. It will really help me as I try to float this new Studio Diary series. Say bye, Max.